The wind cut sideways, hissing through the pines like it had a grudge. Snow rose and fell in bitter whirls, covering up what little trace she'd left behind. Etta Mae's boots, if they could still be called that, were soaked clean through, the left one half split at the toe. Every step stole warmth she couldn't spare, and the only thing keeping her upright was sheer, stubborn disbelief. She kept glancing behind her, as if she might catch Eli galloping toward her on horseback. But he wasn't coming. Not this time. Thomas had said it soft, like a hymn spoken over supper. "I'll circle back with firewood. Just wait by that old stump. Don't wander." Then he'd smile with that thin-lipped way he always did when he'd made up his mind and didn't need her opinion. The horse had sounded wrong as it trotted away. Too smooth. She knew the rhythm of a man leaving when he had no plan to return. Her father had ridden out like that once, and Etta, just 13 then, had known even through her tears what that sound meant. That was hours ago, or longer. Time didn't pass the same out here, in the wild white. It blurred and bit and laughed at clocks. A raven cried above her, black wings carving the gray. She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. It was a wedding gift, once lavender, now streaked with soot and salt. Her fingers no longer ached. They'd passed that stage. They'd gone quiet. She stumbled against a snow-hidden root and caught herself against a crooked pine. Bark split her palm. She stared at the blood like it belonged to someone else. The forest around her seemed to breathe. Trees leaned like old men with secrets, and the snow kept falling, slow and soundless. "I ain't gonna die like this," she thought. Not like this. Not as some forgotten preacher's daughter who couldn't give her husband a child. Not as a town's pity or punchline. Not as a body buried in white. She pressed on, one step, then another, her legs shaking under the long skirt stiff with ice. Her breath was ragged, her ribs sore from shivering. Every part of her had narrowed into this, moving forward, even without direction, even without hope. Somewhere behind her, the last of her boot's heel snapped off. She didn't stop to pick it up. What was the point? The forest changed subtly around her. The trees grew closer, tighter. The snow deeper. The hush louder. Then she saw it, half covered in snow. The stump he'd told her to wait by. She'd walked in a circle. Her knees buckled. This time, she didn't catch herself. She landed hard in the snow and didn't rise. Her cheek pressed against the ground. Cold seeped into her teeth. Her mouth opened slightly, as if to pray, but no sound came, not even breath. The world dimmed at the edges. Pine needles blurred. Her heartbeat slowed. So this is how it ends, she thought, like a thread snipped at the edge of a hem. She saw her mother's hands, sewing in the parlor, heard the distant hymn of morning bells, heard Thomas's voice again, bitter and cruel in its indifference. "Maybe if you were more woman, we have had a child by now." Shame burned brighter than the cold. Somewhere between consciousness and surrender, she heard it. Footsteps, not a horse's rhythm. Boots. Soft, heavy, deliberate. Her mind flared. Thomas? No, he rode away. These steps came from nowhere she recognized. Then a shadow fell over her. A pair of dark legs, buckskin laced, dusted in snow. A man crouched beside her, his face half-shadowed by a fur-lined hood. He did not touch her, not at first. Just studied her, as though weighing what she was worth. She tried to speak, but only a rasp came. He looked at her cracked lips, the torn shawl, the bruises forming on her temple. Then, slowly, he reached into a pouch and pulled free a piece of rawhide. He tied it around her wrist, not for binding, for claiming. His voice, when it came, was low and rough like creek stones underwater. "You're mine now." Not a threat, not a question, a promise. And then the world disappeared again, swallowed by white. She drifted through memory. Songs her mother sang, her father reading from Psalms, her wedding day with Thomas looking bored and itchy in his collar, her belly month after month refusing to swell. God, why couldn't I give him what he wanted? Why did I ever believe that'd make me worthy? She floated. Heat reached her in flickers. Someone lifted her, not by force, but with the care of a man who understood how close she stood to breaking. And though her body was limp and lost of frost, Something inside her, some small ember, refused to die. When she woke, it would still be snowing. When she woke, she'd smell firewood and rabbit broth and hear the quiet crackle of safety. But for now, there was only silence. And in that silence, a single truth that pulsed louder than fear. Someone found her, and he did not walk away. The first thing she felt was warmth, not comfort, just the absence of death. A low heat that didn't belong to her body, radiating from somewhere close. When she opened her eyes, the light flickered in orange and gold across a low ceiling of pine beams, rough and smoke-darkened. She didn't know where she was. Her mouth was dry, her lips cracked, her limbs swaddled in unfamiliar furs. Her hand, the one he'd tied, still bore the strip of rawhide, loosely knotted, resting over her wrist like a question unanswered. The fire crackled nearby, a shallow blaze fed with juniper. Its scent was sharp and sweet, and smoke drifted upward through a narrow hole in the roof. There was no sound beyond it, no voices, no boots, no laughter, just wind outside and fire inside. Her eyes found him. He sat across the room on a hide-covered bench, back straight, knees wide apart. His skin caught the firelight like polished earth, dark, sun-worn alive. His jaw was strong and still. One braid fell down his chest. The others were tucked beneath a heavy coyote pelt that wrapped his shoulders. He was not watching her. He held a long knife in one hand, carving something from bone. His movements were patient, quiet, not aimless. Etta tried to sit up, and pain lit her spine like fire. She gasped. That got his attention. His head lifted, not quick, not startled, just aware. His eyes were dark, but not hard. They held something steadier than curiosity. Not pity, not desire. Recognition. He set the carving aside and moved toward her, kneeling by the bed of pine boughs and wool he'd laid for her. From the corner, he picked up a shallow wooden bowl. Steam rose from it. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. He dipped a carved spoon into the bowl and offered it without touching her. Rabbit stew. Her stomach rebelled at first, but hunger pushed past it. She sipped. The warmth rolled through her chest like something she'd forgotten was possible. Red elk, he said, not pointing to himself, not gesturing, just naming. She stared at him, unsure if he meant the name for himself or something else. He didn't elaborate. After a few more mouthfuls, she managed to whisper, "Etta?" He nodded once, like he'd already known. Outside, wind beat against the walls. The world beyond was still cruel and frozen, but inside this hut built into the hillside, something ancient had settled. Not comfort, but quiet. He rose and returned to the bench. The bone carving resumed. She watched it take shape, antlers, maybe, or a horse. The next few hours passed without speech. She slept again, and when she woke the second time, her shawl was folded beside her, stitched at the seam. Her boots, patched crudely with sinew, dried by the fire. There was a copper pot warming water, and a small bar of lye soap wrapped in leather. He'd made space for her, without making demands. The third time she spoke, her voice came through cracked and cautious. "Why did you save me?" He didn't answer immediately, just set the carving down again and reached for a small stick of charcoal. On the dirt floor near the fire, he drew a line, then another, boot prints. Then he brushed one away with the back of his hand. "Snow lies," he said finally, "but it don't hide everything." She didn't understand, not fully, but she felt the meaning before the words caught up. She shifted under the furs. "He left me." He didn't flinch, didn't ask who he was. "You already knew," she said. "I saw tracks," he murmured. Yours staggered, his clean. That hurt more than it should have. That someone could see the shame written in her footprints. She looked down at her hands. The skin at her wrist was rubbed raw from when she fought to stay upright, gripping reins, clutching branches. Bruises bloomed like violets beneath her sleeves. "I wasn't supposed to survive," she whispered. "You did." The simplicity of it undid her. She didn't speak for a long while after that. He poured water into a small tin cup and passed it to her. She drank slow, letting each swallow remind her that she still lived. Later that evening, he moved to a second fur bundle and unfurled it into a mat across from hers. He didn't share her fire, though he'd built it. He didn't ask questions, though he clearly had them. He didn't reach for her, though she'd seen the way his eyes softened when she coughed in her sleep. He existed like a man who'd lost much already, and wasn't eager to gain something just to lose it again. The hut was small, barely larger than a wagon, built low into a hill with pine logs sunk into earth. There were no windows, only a door bar with a single beam and a smoke hole above. That night, she dreamed of Thomas, of how he used to brush her hair, of the first year when he whispered sweet promises behind closed doors, of how that turned to disappointment, then silence, then contempt. She woke with tears in a sore throat and Red Oak's shadow stirring near the fire. He was boiling snow. When he saw she was awake, he set the kettle aside and sat, not beside her, just near. "You're not afraid," she asked, "of what they'll say?" He shrugged. "They already say." She almost laughed. It came out as a dry cough. "Do you live alone?" His jaw moved slightly. "Since the soldiers burned the last village." She blinked. "Your family?" He nodded once. Her voice grew even smaller. "I'm sorry. Was long ago." Then, after a pause, long enough to remember only the good. She stared at the fire. "I wish I could forget some of mine." He glanced at her, then toward the door. "Snow berries. But spring remembers." The word sat with her, heavy like a blanket pulled close. In the days that followed, her strength returned slowly. He taught her how to use the boiling stones to heat water when the fire was low. She watched him tan hides. She learned to stir ash into soap, to use birch bark for kindling. When she dropped the pan and flinched, he didn't ask why. He just waited for her hands to still before he spoke again. There were no loud moments, no grand gestures, only small ones. Him brushing snow from her boots before setting them by the fire, her folding his pelts neatly when he returned from a hunt. A glance, a nod. One afternoon, while she stitched a torn sleeve, he laid the carving on the ledge beside her. A horse, perfectly shaped, with one ear slightly chipped. She looked up. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. That night, before the fire, she sang a hymn. Not loud, just under her breath. She hadn't sung in months. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, she found him staring at the fire like it had told him something he hadn't wanted to hear. She touched her wrist, where the rawhide still lay. She hadn't removed it, not because she couldn't, because it reminded her. Someone had seen her broken and knelt beside her anyway. The mule brayed before dawn, stamping fog into the air like it wanted to shake off the silence. Red Oak stood at the edge of the trees, his horse saddled, 2 packs secure behind the saddle horn, one full of dried meat and hides, the other with a shawl and boots carefully mended by Etta's hands. He said nothing but waited. Etta stood barefoot for a moment longer on the porch of his winter hut, toes curled against the cold plank. Her shawl fluttered in the breeze like the last breath of some gentler version of herself. She glanced once toward the fire still smoldering inside, then forward. She mounted without a word. He swung up behind her, and they rode. The path out of the pines narrowed like a throat closing, the trail winding through old scars of burned trunks and stubborn brush that refused to die. The town sat a few hours east, past a ridge where snow thinned and suspicion thickened. They arrived before midday. No one met them at the edge of town. No children ran beside the horse. No hands lifted in greeting. Still the eyes were there, behind curtains, through cracked shutters, peering out from the folds of Sunday clothes. Etta slid down first, jaw tight, holding the shawl close at her throat. The buildings hadn't changed. Church steeple bent slightly, the inn still leaning like an old woman with hip trouble, and the general store with its 2 dusty windows and door that never closed right. But the town had a new silence, not the kind that came from winter, the kind that came from judgment. Mrs. Winslow was the first to speak. She stepped out from the inn's porch, arms crossed over a burgundy bodice, eyes squinting like the sun hurt. Or maybe it did. "Well," she said, "look what came back with the snow." Etta didn't respond. She walked to the stable, nodding once at the boys sweeping hay. He stared wide-eyed at Red Elk standing still beside the mule, expression unreadable. Sheriff Bell emerged next, slow-moving and heavy-lidded like always. He wore the same coat he had when Etta first arrived as a bride, blue wool, now faded and patched. His mustache drooped. He didn't reach for his badge or his gun, just looked at her the way a man might look at a fence post starting to rot. "Heard you died," he said. "I didn't," she replied. He nodded. "Your husband said you ran off, took a horse and a rifle, and never looked back." She shook her head. "He left me in the snow with no rifle." Bell sighed, pulling off his hat and rubbing the bald spot. "That version won't sell easy round here." "I ain't asking it to," she said. He looked over at Red Elk, who hadn't moved. "You plan to stay, girl?" "I plan to sleep one night under a roof that's mine by law." Bell hesitated. Then he said quiet like, "You were born here. You still got that right. For now." Etta walked toward the inn, but Mrs. Winslow stepped forward, blocking the door. "I don't run a saloon," she said. "And I don't house whatever it is you become." "I've got coin," Etta said, "and my father married couples under that roof. You owe me the dignity of shelter." Mrs. Winslow's eyes narrowed. "Your father would cry to see you now." Etta leaned in. "He cried while you begged for mercy during childbirth behind the choir loft, remember? He didn't throw your shame back at you." That earned a sharp inhale, a flicker of something bitter. But the door opened. A boy, Winslow's youngest, stood behind it, eyes wide. "Ma, she can sleep in the hayloft. It's warm." Mrs. Winslow hissed, under her breath, "Fine, but be gone by sunrise." Etta nodded once. "I'll be gone when I choose." That night, she laid in the loft, listening to horses breathe beneath her. The walls were thin, but they held. She curled up under an old saddle blanket. Red Elk had disappeared into the woods beyond town after darkfall, like a ghost who knew better than to sit among the scorned. She didn't sleep much. She thought of her father's sermons about mercy. She thought of Thomas's hands, gentle at first, then always just a bit too hard. She thought of the wedding ring she once wore, the one she buried in a snowbank without ceremony. In the stillness of night, she rose and moved to the edge of the loft, looking out toward the church. The steeple leaned slightly east. The bell hadn't rung since the storm 3 winters ago. The town didn't change. It just shifted the shape of its judgment. In the morning, she walked barefoot to the well, pulling the rope slowly. Children watched her, curious. Adults looked past her, as if she might vanish with enough ignoring. Sheriff Bell caught her on the walk back. "You mean to tell me Thomas left you for dead?" "I don't mean to," she said. "He did." "Then why come back? Why not stay hidden, tucked away with him?" She met his gaze. "Because I don't want to hide. Not anymore." He gave a slow nod. "There's danger in staying where you ain't forgiven. There's more in leaving without a name." He scratched at his chin. "He's coming back, you know. Word is, he's bringing others." She stared. He never could let go of what he broke. Bell shifted his weight. "You want protection?" She shook her head. "No, I want him to see I survived." Bell sighed. "If you need me, I'll listen. Might not act, but I'll listen. That's more than anyone's done in months." Later that day, as the sun began to set behind the crooked church, Red Elk returned. No one saw where he came from. He simply appeared, standing by the well as if he'd always been part of the landscape. He didn't speak, but his presence sent whispers through the town. Children stared. Men averted their gaze. Women clutched shawls tighter. He held something in his hand, a sprig of wild sage. He offered it to her, without explanation. Etta took it, not as a token, as a question answered. When night came, she didn't go back to the loft. She walked past the edge of town, where the brush thickened and the wind changed its song. He followed behind her, not close, not far, just enough to be near. They didn't speak until the trees surrounded them again. "I wasn't meant to stay," she said. "I didn't ask you to." She looked at him, truly looked, and saw not a rescuer, but a man who carried silence like a second language. "Will you walk with me?" she asked. He nodded once. As far as you'll go. And in that moment, beneath the watching stars and bitter sky, she made the choice a town would never understand. She turned away from the place that pretended not to see and stepped toward the man who always had. Snow had stopped falling by the time they reached the valley, though the white still hung in the air like breath held too long. Pines lined the hills in neat rows, their branches cradling silence. Etta walked beside Red, elk this time, no longer riding, her boots steady in the crusted snow. Her skirts were cleaner, stitched with care. Her body still ached in places, but her soul had begun to hum, like something once cracked, now setting slowly into place. His home stood low and wide beneath a limestone ridge, shaped by hands that had no need for spectacle. A lean-to for tools, a pen for chickens, a shelter for the mule. The cabin itself was made of thick-hewn logs stacked tight, chinked with moss and mud. A wooden wind chime of bone and shell swayed from the eaves, clicking soft as whispered names. He opened the door and stepped back, letting her go first. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of pine pitch and juniper ash. She moved slowly, fingers grazing the wooden walls as if committing them to memory. One wall was lined with herbs strung in bunches, sage, yarrow, lavender. Another held shelves stacked with hides, carved bowls, flint tools, and small polished stones. But it was a table that stopped her. A square block of pine, worn and marked with years of use. Upon it, a small figure carved from antlers sat beside a half-finished one. A woman, hair braided, face serene. She picked it up without asking. He let her. "She has my braid," she whispered. "I remembered." That was all he said. But the heat that rushed up her throat said more than his words ever could. They fell into rhythm after that. Not quickly, but with the slow certainty of two lives learning how to braid together. He hunted. She cooked. He repaired the door hinges. She patched the quilt with pieces from her old wedding dress, shredding it without ceremony. Some nights they spoke, others they didn't. But even in silence, the cabin was never empty. He taught her how to trap rabbit, how to set a snare with a loop and bait. She watched his hands more than the trap, how gently he handled even twine and steel. She remembered hands that slapped away her own at the stove, hands that gripped her arm too tightly in front of church friends. These hands did not grab. They offered. One day, she found him carving by the creek. She sat beside him without asking. "You don't touch me," she said quietly, watching the knife skin bone. "I don't need to," he replied. She didn't answer right away. A crow called from the tree-line. Snow melt ran beneath the ice in soft trickles. "I thought, after what you said when you found me, that I was yours. I meant you were not left, that I would not leave." Her throat tightened. "Everyone else did. I am not everyone." And that, too, became truth. She began to sing again, low, wordless tunes at first, old hymns later, though her voice wavered on the high notes. He listened but never asked what the words meant. Sometimes at night, she heard him humming one of her melodies as he stirred coals or sharpened his blade. The sound settled in her like balm. One evening, as the firelight deepened the shadows across the cabin walls, she stood behind him while he worked on a wooden bowl. She placed her hand on his shoulder, not by accident, not in fear. He stilled, then turned. For the first time, she touched his face, tracing the line of the scar above his brow, the one that caught light like a reminder. He didn't flinch. Her thumb moved across his cheekbone. His eyes never left hers. "Thank you," she said. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if her words held weight he wasn't ready to carry. When he opened them again, he said softly, "You smile now." She hadn't noticed, but it was true. Spring thaw came slowly, but it came. The creek ran louder. Snow pulled back from the edges of the valley. New grass broke through the softened earth. She stood in the doorway one morning, hands wrapped around a cup of bark tea, watching a squirrel dart through the brush. Behind her, he whittled something small at the table. "Your husband," he said without looking up, "will come." She said nothing. "You're not afraid?" "I am," she admitted, "but I'm more tired of hiding than I am of being afraid." He set the carving down. "Then we make ready." They didn't speak of weapons. They didn't dig traps. They prepared in quieter ways, by gathering what she would take as she had to leave, by placing salt and smoked meat into packs, by sharpening memory more than blades. But most of all, they kept living. That was a defiance. At dusk, he handed her something wrapped in deerskin. She opened it to find a small ring, carved from wood and burned with spiral pattern. "It is not marriage," he said, "not unless you choose." She turned it in her fingers, feeling the grain, the warmth still inside it from his hands. "But it means I would walk with you," he continued, "if you let me." She didn't answer, not with words. She slid the ring onto her finger, sat beside him at the fire, and laid her head on his shoulder. It was enough. For now, the sky bruised purple before the sun fell, clouds low and fast like riders on a chase. Etta stood outside the cabin, her hands buried in the warmth of a pelt-lined shawl, watching the smoke rise from the chimney like a silent signal. The valley had softened with spring, but the snow still clung to the hollows, the shadowed places. She could feel it coming, the way an animal feels a storm before the wind shifts. Red Oak came up behind her without a sound. He didn't touch her, just stood beside her, eyes scanning the tree line. "They're close," he said. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. One horse limps." She nodded. She already knew whose horse it was. Thomas. She hadn't spoken his name in weeks. Not since Belle's warning in the town. Not since the morning she'd chosen to stay instead of vanish. "Do we run?" she asked. "No," Red Oak said. "We let them find what they think they want." He didn't ask her to hide, didn't order her inside. That evening, they lit the fire low and left the door ajar. A kettle boiled slow over the embers. She dressed plainly, in the same mended skirt she'd worn the day she returned to town. No jewelry, no makeup, no mask. Just her. When the hoofbeats came, she did not flinch. For men rode in, Thomas at the front, his coat clean, his face thinner than before, but his eyes still carrying the same hollowness that once silenced rooms. He dismounted first, boots crunching through wet earth, and strode toward the cabin with the easy arrogance of a man who believed the world still bent in his favor. "You're alive," he said, like it inconvenienced him. "I am. You made quite the scandal." She didn't answer. She let the quiet sit between them. "I came to bring you home," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's end this foolishness. You don't belong out here." Her gaze didn't waver. Home is where someone stays. He blinked, a flicker of confusion. Then his mouth twisted. "So you're his now." Red Oak stepped into the doorway, not looming, not posturing, simply present. Thomas turned, eyes narrowing. "You think you can keep her? Think a wild dog like he gets to clean up what's mine." Etta stepped between them. "She was never yours," she said, voice calm. "You broke what you couldn't control." "You're sick," Thomas spat. "Ruined. What kind of woman lays down with a savage in the woods?" "The kind that remembers what peace feels like," she replied. "The kind that doesn't beg to be seen anymore." One of the men behind Thomas shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable. Another spat into the dirt. Thomas took a step forward. "You don't get to talk to me that way." "I do," she said. "I've earned every word." Red Oak didn't move. Not even when Thomas reached for the pistol on his hip. The trap triggered in a snap of rope and wood. Thomas's foot yanked out from under him, slammed hard to the earth, gun scattering across the mud. Before he could rise, Red Oak was there, knee on his chest, one hand pressed his collarbone, but he didn't strike. He just looked down at him with something colder than rage, something final. "She is not yours," Red Oak said, "and if you come back, you won't walk away." Thomas's breath rasped, not from fear, but disbelief. He had never been beaten without violence. Only power, only silence. The man on horseback spoke low. "Let him up." Red Oak did. Thomas stood, humiliated, mud on his face, hand trembling. He turned to Etta. "This is the last time I'll ask." She looked at him and saw, for the first time, how small he was, not in stature, but in soul. "No," she said. He rode away without another word, the others following, none of them speaking. They disappeared into the trees like ghosts losing their shape. When the silence returned, it was not empty. It was whole. Back inside, Etta stood by the fire, hand steady, heart louder than her breath. Red Oak stirred the coals, then placed a log atop the flames. The light flickered across their faces. "He'll come again," she said. "Maybe, but I won't be afraid." He looked at her then, eyes soft and proud. "I know." She walked toward the table and pulled something from the pouch hanging near the bed. A strand of her old wedding veil, now cut short and tied at both ends. She placed it beside the carved ring. "I'd like to wear it again," she said, this time with meaning. He didn't smile, but his eyes shone. That night, beneath the stars and scent of pine ash, they stood outside the cabin. She wore a dress of patched calico. He wore a woven sash over his shoulder. Feathers braided through his hair. There were no witnesses but the trees, the stars, and the wind. Still, it felt holy. When she placed the carved ring back on her finger, he whispered, "You're mine now," with no claim in it, only wonder. And she replied, "I know." The snow had long since melted from the valley, but something else remained, a warmth that couldn't be buried, a promise that at last would hold. And in the hush of night, with the world behind them and the fire ahead, she realized, where the snow had once followed to kill her, it would never find her here again, because this time she had stayed, because this time someone had stayed with her. And some stories, even in silence, become songs.